Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast, so we're going to be talking about horror things that could involve such sensitive subjects as child abuse, the R word, the F word. We're going to potentially talk about bad things, but that's not what it's all about. It's fun, okay? We do the warning because we have to, because FCC or whatever. Anyway, Steve, what do we got coming up?
Oh, lots of stuff. Still have about 12 people on the guest list, so we won't go through that whole list. We've got the Discord server. We do streaming every Sunday night, either one of our newer episodes or one of our past episodes, and Chris hosts a drawing party streaming him working on his webcomic, piecesoflesh.com. And our website, of course, horrormakesushappy.com, has got right there on the front page, has got links to our Discord and Twitch. So check that out. But today we are talking to author Todd Keisling, best known for his work Devil's Creek and Scanlines. Welcome to the show.
Oh, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I don't remember what we did or did not talk about prior to the show. So as a reminder, the show really is less about your body of work, but more about you as a fan of horror. So we'll be talking about that kind of stuff. But before we get into that, do you want to let people know what you're currently working on?
Sure. So my most recent release was my second collection, Cold, Black, and Infinite, Stories of the Horrific and Strange. It's available now from Cemetery Dance. Currently, my agent is shopping around my new novel, The Sundowners Dance, and I'm also working on the follow-up to Devil's Creek, which is tentatively titled Revelation Road.
Sounds good.
I like these titles.
Thank you.
So jumping into the interview part of it, what are your earliest memories of scary things?
I've written about this in a semi-autobiographical story called Saving Granny from the Devil, but there was an incident in my room I was a small child that I still remember vividly, and I have no explanation for it. So take that for what it's worth. A little bit of background. After my parents divorced when I was very young, maybe like a year old. And so my mom and I, for a time, were homeless and lived with my great-grandmother, my granny. So we lived in the upstairs bedroom of her home. And whenever Mom had to work, or she was working during the day and she was taking classes at night. So Granny would be the one to kind of take care of me because she was retired and everything. And we would rent a VCR, like the top loading kind, to give you an idea of how far back we're talking. Because my dad worked at Pepsi. There's a Pepsi bottling plant in town. I had one of those store displays. It had like 3 different shelves, Pepsi branded. And that's where I kept all my toys. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like a tiered hierarchy. You know, my favorite toys went, are higher levels. And my favorite toy at the time was a monkey. I took that thing with me everywhere. And so I knew how to work a VCR by the time I was like 3 years old, because that was my entertainment. Mom would rent like a bunch of Disney movies, and then she'd also have her horror movies off to the side, and I'll come back to that. So I'm watching, I want to say it was Labyrinth. Mm-hmm. And I happened to look over, I see movement out of the corner of my eye. I'm sitting on Mom's bed, and the monkey is crawling towards the edge of the shelf. So naturally, I scream bloody murder because what the hell is happening? Granny races up the stairs. What's wrong? What's wrong? And I'm crying, and I point to the shelf. The monkey's not there. It had fallen to the floor. Mm-hmm. Now, here's the thing. That the monkey wasn't on the edge. It wasn't like he sat in the middle. Like this thing wasn't just, this was like a square shelf. He sat in the middle because he was the king, Mm-hmm. So somehow this monkey managed to fling itself onto the floor. And I made my granny take it away. I'm assuming they tossed it or donated it because I never saw that monkey again. That's probably my earliest memory of being scared. maybe I'm misremembering it. Maybe I'm not. I don't know, and I can't explain it. So that's my earliest memory of being scared. Now let's go back to the horror movies my mom would rent.
Mm-hmm.
I would spend all day watching my movies. So when I ran out of movies to watch, I would watch mom's movies, unbeknownst to my granny or my mother. So some of my childhood heroes were Ash Williams from the Evil Dead franchise, Mike and Reggie from Phantasm,
Nice.
Emilio Estevez from Maximum Overdrive, which to this day I have seen so many times I pretty much have it memorized.
I actually just watched that for the first time the other day.
It's awful, isn't it?
Parts of it are, yeah, it's dated, but
it's basically Cocaine the movie.
Yeah,
it's horrible, and I love it.
Yeah, it's great in the awful, hilarious way that the best bad movies are.
I don't think I've ever seen that one, so I'm glad you like it.
I think it's on Prime, actually. It comes to Prime from time to time, so check it out.
Yeah.
So I, from a very early age, had this weird love of all things horror. I started watching the horror movies more than I watched the Disney films and the kids movies that mom would rent. And I didn't find them scary per se. I found them funny. Like Evil Dead 2 to a young child is hilarious.
It is.
Because it's so ridiculous and so over the top. It's like a slapstick comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So, I wanted to watch that stuff. I didn't want to watch the Disney films and everything. And on top of all of that, my mom was also a big reader. So it was very common to see a stack of Stephen King novels from the library. Dean Koontz was another one of her favorites. Rick Hotelaw. And so I grew up being surrounded by this.
Mm-hmm.
I come by it honestly, and usually when this question comes up, on panels and whatnot, I usually just start it with saying, I blame my mother.
It's a good blanket statement to start off with,
I blame my mother, and that's
watching you.
That's really it's very true. I learned it from watching you.
At least her being a horror fan, she'd be okay with it. I mean,
yeah. But as I've grown older, in reflecting back on a lot of my childhood and everything, I mean, the more psychological aspects of it, my parents divorced, my dad not being around, my mom kind of being a basket case. There was just this strange confluence of circumstances that kind of fed into my psyche along with the horror and kind of bolstered the horror interest and everything.
All right. So mom was a horror fan too.
Yes.
Anybody else in the family?
Not really. No, I was pretty much the black sheep of the family. Mom was the odd one. So I was
the odder one,
the otter of the family, I guess. Like nobody, my dad's side of the family was much more accepting. My mom's side of the family didn't really understand. Bear in mind, this is southeastern Kentucky in the 80s and 90s. Very conservative, very, for better or worse, Christian.
Also in the high point of the satanic panic.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I was a teenager when Columbine happened.
Mm-hmm.
I got ostracized a lot after Columbine happened.
Did you also have a trench coat that after that day you could never wear again?
I did not have a trench coat then. I had a trench coat in college, and I stopped wearing it after I got accused of shoplifting a drink from the college commissary.
No, that's a good reason.
Yeah. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Look, I've stolen many things here, but it was not that.
Yeah.
It's like, if I'm going to steal something, I'm going to make it worth it.
I'll come back later and steal your heart out of your chest.
I like how many directions that went in the matter of a couple of seconds.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you said your mom was a basket case, was there a particular way that you meant that?
Well, I mean, mom, in her defense, had a lot on her shoulders.
Mm.
She didn't want to take me back to, she didn't want to move back in with her parents because they're impoverished. It wasn't a good environment. Granny offered a better environment. I should mention that Granny, great-grandmother, was actually my dad's grandmother. So we were living with my dad's grandmother after mom and dad got divorced. Very strange arrangement, but that's the kind of person my granny was. She was
Take care of family.
a very kind soul. She wanted me to have a roof over my head.
Mhm.
And Granny for a long time was my best friend. Like, I spent more time with Granny than I did with my mom. That, I guess we moved out. Mom got remarried when I was in kindergarten, so I guess I was 5 to 6, and home life wasn't great. Stepdad tended to be a very violent person, not physically but emotionally abusive.
Mhm.
And again, these are things that I'm really only coming to terms with now that I'm older and can reflect back. I don't have a lot of positive memories of being home with mom and my stepdad.
Can relate.
So my dad's side of the family was more, I enjoyed my time with them. I have so many happy memories with them, but mom had custody.
Mhm.
Now, in my mom's defense, she was trying to provide for me and also manage living at home with a guy who completely changed after the ring was on her finger.
Mhm. Can relate to that too.
Yeah, so they're still married. So this is very,
Oh.
Hopefully they don't listen to this, but at the same time, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Just being honest.
All of my parents are dead. I can say it.
We've made peace with each other.
That's good.
But, when I say she was a basket case, I mean she needed to be medicated in a time when all that stuff was not understood.
Right.
Mhm.
So, in adulthood, I've come to, discover that, I have ADHD. I'm on the autism spectrum.
Oh.
And a lot of that puts so much of my childhood in perspective. And it seems obvious now, but at the time it was just, well, why is he weird? Why don't you go outside more often? Why do you spend all day in your room reading books or playing video games?
Why are you different?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why aren't you like everybody else? Why aren't you happy?
Which is even more difficult of a situation when you're living in a conservative environment.
Oh yeah, especially then.
Oh yeah, the whole religious thing. I mean, I've
not
talked
even necessarily about the religion part of it. Just a conservative people by nature are very conformity.
Yeah. Like they're the town I grew up in, which is the setting for Devil's Creek. I just changed some names. That town was not very nurturing to a person like me.
No towns really were at that time. Well, I mean, a small town even more so, I imagine.
A small Southern Baptist town. Corbin, Kentucky was not friendly and still isn't really to people who don't fall into the status quo.
Right.
We'll put it that way.
All of my parents have passed on now, so there's nobody for them. They're not going to hear this, but my mother dealt with clinical depression her whole life, drug use. Her second marriage was to a real piece of shit who, like you say, really changed after the ring was on her finger, and even more so once she had a child with him. He beat the living shit out of me. I was living with them at the time, and beat the living shit out of me right in front of her while, the newborn baby was with her on the couch. And the moment that she tried to, stand up and defend me, he turned to her and says, "You don't like you can get the fuck out too and take your other kid with you." And he controlled her through the pocketbook. He made her give him her paycheck every week, and only give her whatever money he thought she needed for cigarettes and gas kind of thing. And so she spent literally years nickel and diming, saving pennies here and there until she had a couple $100 squirreled away that she could leave them.
Jesus, I'm so sorry.
I mean, I only lived with them for about a year and a half before he kicked me out, and I wound up back with my father. But I feel, more worse for her. And my sister was only, I think, 6 years old when he passed away, so she never really knew him. She loves him to death because he was her dad and she was his princess, and she never got to see that side of him. So good for her.
Scenarios.
But I did. Anyway, going back to the movies.
Going back to the movie, let's make this more about the fun part of this podcast.
No, I mean, part of our show, we're not shy. We don't shy away from that kind of thing. It's important to talk about these things with whatever sober rationality we can and be respectful of the situations because it's reality.
Yeah, that's our jam. Sam's Helping Sam's.
Sam's?
It's it's one of my stupid movie references. It's from Satanic Panic. It's fun. It's a good movie. You should check it out.
Okay. Take your word for it. Evil Dead. Would you like to talk about Evil Dead?
Yeah.
So I actually saw Evil Dead 2 first.
Okay.
I mean, that's probably better. I think that's what they ultimately went for in the second one.
Yeah. Like I remember watching Evil Dead 1 when I was a few years older. Still too young to be watching it, but and not enjoying it because it was way more serious.
Yeah.
I mean, I enjoy it now for what it is. It's a classic and a fantastic horror film. But Evil Dead 2 for me was formative.
Yeah.
It was taking a guy who was awkward and trying to play himself up to be stronger than he thinks he is to his girlfriend, and something happens to her. He goes out, tries to save her, and all this weird shit starts happening around the house because he stupidly played a recording. And over the course of that film, he goes from being a coward to being a hero in his own way. Because initially he's hiding in the cellar. He's hiding from the evil that's looking for him, and then by the end, he's cut off his hand, and he's found a way to mount a chainsaw to the stump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
He's trying to save the world, and for me, that was probably my first. Without knowing it, that was probably my first exposure to like the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
In its own Sam Raimi kind of way.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like, I do notice that in not just Evil Dead 2 or even 1, but also Army of Darkness, he always seems to have a tone of the reluctant hero, the hero that has this life thrust upon him, and he's either too inexperienced or too afraid or just too lazy and doesn't want to do it. And then by the end of the movie, you have that complete turnaround. Yeah.
I think that was my attraction to it, along with just the stupidity, like the whole scene where you don't know if he's losing his mind or not, and all the things in the house are laughing along with him. The deer head's laughing, the lamp is laughing, the shutters are laughing, and he starts doing that stupid ass dance to imitate the lamp going up and down. And he's just going insane. Like, I found that hilarious. I still find that hilarious.
It's Bruce Campbell at his best.
Oh, yeah.
What about Phantasm?
Oh, Phantasm, man. Phantasm, it's the uncertainty of it all. It's the kid seeing something that he's not supposed to see, and how it kind of invades his reality after he's witnessed it. Mm-hmm. To the point that he can't recognize what's reality and what isn't, or if it's all part of reality and it's kind of intermingling. He's got the cool older brother. I didn't have a cool older brother. Mm-hmm. He's got a cool older brother with a big nice car. He's got a friendly ice cream man who's good friends with his older brother. Mm-hmm. But mostly Mike in Phantasm, he's a loner. He kind of goes off on his own, does his own thing. He follows his brother around. Then one day he happens to see, this ridiculously tall guy heaving a coffin back into a hearse with one hand. It's for me, it was the way the impossible slowly invades what would otherwise be a mundane suburban life. And it takes on the feel of a bad dream.
It really does. It's got that surreal feeling to it. Just the score, the cinematography, and really, I think you hit the nail on the head with the disconnection of reality. Like, you don't know if what is real anymore. Because, like, was it 5? I think Phantasm Ravager, the one that just came out.
They really play around with that in 5.
They do, and a lot of people hated that because it's like a whole mental hospital back and forth thing. But no, that's the core of the story. Is like it fucks with you on what's real and what's not.
Yeah. So I think that was the appeal. Plus the silver balls, the Sentinels are fucking amazing. What a great idea,
right?
And it's just in general, it's just a bizarre film. It's bizarre in the best ways because, okay, so this guy's, he's stealing bodies. But no, wait, he's stealing bodies and he's sending them into an alternate dimension.
Right? Like, who comes up with this shit?
It just keeps upping the ante of your expectations, you know, like, oh, this is what you think it is. No, it's not.
By the way, they also bleed mustard.
Yeah, they bleed mustard. It's more like honey Dijon, I think. It's got a thicker, less, you know, not as harsh a yellow coloration.
Yeah, it's definitely not French's.
No.
Hang on, let me get my chicken nuggets. What about Maximum Overdrive?
Again, it's the absurdity of it, I think, that really attracted me. Maximum Overdrive I saw because of my Aunt Kim, not because of my mom. I had happened to walk in on her watching it, and I watched maybe like the last half of it with her because she's a Gen Xer, so she was all about Emilio Estevez because he was a heartthrob at the time, you know?
Yeah, Young Guns.
And I had my mom rent it separately so that I could watch it all the way through, and it's by Stephen King. Well, Stephen King's the guy who writes the books on Mom's nightstand. Mm-hmm. So I knew Stephen King was a name I recognized from a very early age. I didn't really follow, I mean, obviously I couldn't follow the actors and whatnot, but Bruce Campbell was a name. You know, Ash was a name. Mm-hmm. But back to Maximum Overdrive, I mean, it was so damn funny to me. Like, look at these trucks. They're just coming to life. They just want to do their own thing. Yep. So every time it became a staple of our visits to the town's only video rental place, I wanted to watch Maximum Overdrive again. And we rented that movie so many times that one of my mom's friends had a VCR, so we rented our VCR for the week and took it over there, and there was a way to put 2 VCRs and record from one to the other. So we recorded our own tape of Maximum Overdrive. Now, this particular cassette had 3 movies on it. It had Maximum Overdrive, Dirty Dancing in the middle for my mom, and Evil Dead 2 at the end.
Nice. It's a good combo.
So I watched this cassette over and over every day. Like, you know, this is the autism coming in, I think. But it was a comfort thing. I watched it every day. I would watch Maximum Overdrive. I would fast forward through Dirty Dancing. And then,
I was wondering.
And then I would watch Evil Dead. And what's funny is that years later, like I know we still had the videotape, and the last time I can remember watching it, the Dirty Dancing had been fast forwarded through so many times. The tape was like utterly unwatchable. It was so scratched and shit.
That's so, the thing about fast forwarding. You kind of mess up the ribbon. Yeah. Yeah.
It was like a 90-minute section of just a fucked up film you couldn't watch. The audio was distorted. So, for all I know, my mom still has that cassette in storage somewhere. I hope so, because that would be amazing. I'd love to have that back.
You mentioned this movie was comforting to you. How so?
Yeah. It was comforting in the repetition of it, I think. Mm-hmm. I think it, you know, watching it over and over, I knew how it was going to end. Everybody's okay in the end. Or at least, you know...
Everyone that counts.
Everyone that counts.
And dies.
I think... It has kind of like that hero's journey element to it. You know, Emilio Estevez's character, Bill, he's an ex-con, and he's just trying to make ends meet at the Dixie Boy truck stop, and he's being exploited by his boss. I mean, who the hell isn't being exploited by their boss these days? Yeah. And then this extraordinary event happens, and it allows him an opportunity to step up and become something that he wasn't before. I think I'm really drawn to stories like that. I always have been. Mm-hmm. And, you know, beyond that, I can't really say why I found it comforting, other than just it was something I watched over and over.
Yeah, I think stories like that were common in the 80s movies. Yeah. And it was like, it's nostalgic to us at this age, I guess, but also at the time it was comforting because they all had this theme of And I don't know, for me, like watching these younger, I wasn't old enough to be in the workforce yet, but I could still get it because the characters were that good and they just portrayed that theme across in their character. And a point I'm getting at with this ramble is they all seem to have that storyline of person just trying to get through on their day-to-day grind. They just, they're just trying to survive. They have an overpowering authority figure in their boss that's an asshole. Nothing ever works out for them, but then their life is saved by some cataclysmic event, be it all electronic things coming to life or aliens or the end of the world. It was like a common escapism theme in the 80s of, God, my life sucks. I wish aliens would attack.
Right?
I think it's always been a common trope, but maybe that's been changing in the last 10 to 20 years. But I mean, even in the 90s, I mean, that's the basis of the Matrix, it's
true.
a common thing. You had briefly mentioned about, there being a difference between, real life horror versus the media you were consuming. We've talked about some of the real life stuff. Was there other real life stuff that you were referencing back then that we haven't talked about yet? Or have we already talked about that?
Just being bullied in a small town. For me, that was pretty horrific. The stress of not wanting to go to school because those same assholes are going to be there. And, they're going to single me out, laugh or beat me up or whatever they were going to do. It was just generally a bad experience. And the horrors of being a teenager in small town America, a small town conservative America. Nothing else is coming to mind at the moment, though.
Not that that's not enough.
Yeah,
right.
Did that change your current behavior in any way? Like change how you move through life?
Yeah, once I learned to get over myself. Like I was the tortured artist trope all through high school. Once I was starting to understand, my own, talents and what have you. Once I learned to not take myself so seriously and started looking at life differently. I don't like bullies. I don't like seeing people bullied. I try to help people who are being bullied. I'm also very much more aware of, recognizing signs of poor mental health in myself and others. Mm-hmm. And I just try to be better. I just try to be better than the folks who consistently try to tear others down.
That's good.
I try to be there for my friends and cultivate my own little family here.
Family of origin versus family of choice.
Yes. Family of choice is such a big thing.
Was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
When I wasn't at home.
Okay.
I felt like being at home with my mom and stepdad was like walking through a minefield all the time. It probably is one of the reasons why I deal with anxiety today. Because you never knew how they were going to react if, you asked for something or asked to do something. The answer was usually no, of course not, or we don't have the money. And on the flip side, whenever I was with my dad's side of the family, I felt at ease because, again, I didn't have to worry about how people would react to me. It's obvious to me now. I didn't see it then, of course. But, anytime I visit my dad now, it's usually a week of relaxation. My dad's a very mellow person. And, I've tried in the last, 15 years to reconnect with him and salvage our relationship because through college it wasn't great. And my mom might have played a part in that. It's something that I haven't really given a lot of thought about, but you asking that, yeah, definitely felt at ease around my dad, around my mom, my dad's family, but not around my mom and her husband.
Did you participate in Halloween when you were a kid?
Oh, totally. Nice. Halloween was my holiday. My wife calls it spooky Christmas, and I wish I had that term. I wish I had that term in my lexicon when I was younger, because that's totally what it is. Mm-hmm. Halloween was huge for me. I loved dressing up. I loved going, trick-or-treating. Mom would take us she would take me and some of my friends to one of the rich neighborhoods outside of town. And we would just
nice.
walk for hours and just get load up on candy.
That's some good parenting right there.
Yeah.
Our neighborhood. We're going to the rich neighborhood.
Yeah, we went to the rich neighborhood. because, all the houses were close together. And as I grew older, I stopped trick-or-treating, but then I started having parties at my house, with my group of misfit friends, and I would encourage people to dress up. And that was where I introduced my friend group to Evil Dead 2. And that's one of my favorite memories, Halloween memories, is watching all my friends react to the eyeball scene. And I'll never forget, there was a guy who Robbie, who brought a date, and she was a foreign exchange student from Germany. And I will never forget her reaction. She screamed. It was hilarious. So yeah, I have a lot of good memories of that. And we always decorated. We always decorated up the house and everything. And that's something I'm kind of surprised I was allowed to do.
Why?
Just because this goes hand in hand with the conservatism and the religious aspect. It's I wasn't allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons, but then I could go on my computer and play Doom.
Because you're killing demons.
Yeah, you're killing demons. You're the good guy.
Yeah. So in hindsight, I'm surprised I was allowed to decorate for Halloween just because of Satanic Panic and all that bullshit.
I think it depends on just how devout of a Christian you are, because there's this dividing line where obviously there are some Christians or Catholics, I'm not sure the correct term, that are, believe that anything even related to Halloween in the slightest is satanic and yada yada. But then you've got other people who are conservative, but they believe in conforming to the social structure. And for those people, okay, this is April, we're going to do April things. This is May, we're going to do May things. We're going to do March things. And October is Halloween. And then Thanksgiving is, November. And so it's okay because, we are within this time period and it's allowed right now. And this is what we do. It's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Segmented, compartmentalized. That's the word.
Yes.
I'm looking for.
Yes.
Which is interesting in its own way. When you were a kid, did you have a favorite costume?
The Grim Reaper.
Cool.
Yeah, I actually even went to a church function for Halloween.
Oh
God. And I remember even being uneasy about it and telling Granny, I'm I don't know if they'll like my costume. And she's like, they're not going to judge you. They were totally judging me. I went to a church Halloween thing dressed as the Grim Reaper. I had the mask with the light up eyes, and I had the giant sickle and scythe or whatever it is, the robe. And I got a lot of mileage out of that costume for several years. Yeah.
Did you have a least favorite costume?
Yeah, that was the Poor Family Special, I think. Basically, it was Mom forgot all about the Halloween party at school and the night before. And
ghost sheet?
So, no, not a ghost sheet. I was a scarecrow, and I basically just wore, bibbed overalls with a straw hat, and she stuffed bits of hay into my sleeves and stuff. And it was so uncomfortable that I ended up just trashing it all when I got to school.
Understandable.
And, that. Yeah. She'd recommend that every season, every Halloween season. And, absolutely not. That sucks.
Thought you were going to say you were too nice to tell her no, and she just doesn't know it's terrible every year. But now you full on told her no. That thing's awful.
No, it sucks. It's not. It's uncomfortable. It's very scratchy.
I was just going to say, there's the autism spectrum part of it too. Did you have sensory issues with it?
Oh yeah,
I would imagine. Yeah.
Some of my sensory issues are more related to sound and texture. Mm-hmm. And the texture issue, I can't stand. Certain things when they touch me. Or if something is too close to me, if a blanket is too snug, I feel like I'm trapped. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there was definitely some sensory issues with the scarecrow costume.
I suppose those things really
Going into teenage years, were there any particular scary stories or books or movies that jumped out to you from your teenage years?
Oh my God. I discovered Lovecraft.
There you go.
I discovered Lovecraft because of the PC game Quake,
Okay.
which I learned was very, inspired by Lovecraft and some of the architecture and the mood and everything. Very Lovecraftian. And I'm in a bookstore one day and I see this collection of tales, by H.P. Lovecraft. So I pick it up and proceeded to have my mind blown. But even before that, I was still into horror. My first Stephen King book was The Gunslinger. So that was more like fantasy, high fantasy. I was also reading Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz's TikTok I think that was my first Koontz novel. Intensity. Those were my entry points there. Lovecraft was another entry point. Lovecraft led me to Chambers. Yeah, like I was kind of in this weird period of my life where I was absorbing as much as I could from everything. I had this idea for a comic book and I wanted to like write and draw. Like it's kind of like this cyberpunk sci-fi kind of story. I was struggling with my own beliefs at the time, so I wrote like a script for class, and it was like a post-rapture society and all this shit, and I still have it, but it's bad, so it'll never see that. But like I was getting all these influences from everything, and horror at the time was kind of like a guilty pleasure almost because I had to read so much for school.
Yeah.
But I found the time to read Fight Club. I had to read The Stranger by Camus for school and American Psycho by Ellis.
I've heard the book's really good.
It's fucked up. I read all these works in a short span of time, and coupled with, what I didn't know was called cosmic horror at the time, but, Lovecraft and everything, it all kind of fell into this weird mixing pot of influences and ideas. And I guess I was 17 when I started it. I adapted a script that I had written because I was big into film at the time too. I couldn't decide if I wanted to go into comics, graphic design, filmmaking. So I wrote and directed a short film. It was like 30 minutes long, and I couldn't get the story out of my head. So I adapted that into my first novel when I was 17. And that kind of decided my path because of the general reaction from people. But it had aspects of horror. It had aspects of these other influences as well. And it was this, again, a weird melting pot of influences. And even now in my work, I see those influences still.
So what did you like about TikTok?
I like TikTok because it was just a fast-paced book. It was nonstop. It was mysterious. You got a guy who's a writer who receives this little doll on his doorstep, and this thing hatches out of a doll and grows to be man-sized and pursues him over the course of a night. And he doesn't know why. He, is just trying to avoid it. And, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that comes into play, and it draws from some Asian influences, which is awesome. It was so unlike anything I had read up until that point, because prior to King and Koontz, I was reading R.L. Stine. I was reading, some fantasy stuff. I was reading, Jacques or Brian Jakes. I don't remember exactly. He wrote the Redwall books. I was really into the Redwall series. And before that, even, we go back even further, Bunnicula. Scary stories to tell in the dark, in a dark, dark room.
Let's go back to TikTok for a minute. So was the emotional reaction just excitement because of the fast pace of it and the mystery, or was there more of an emotional reaction than that?
I think it was the relentlessness of the antagonist. Okay. Like it's almost like a Terminator kind of story. Like it does not stop. And it had some lighthearted moments. This was before Koontz went full on worshiping his dog. This was back when Koontz still had some teeth. It was just a non-stop, relentless entity. Also the perseverance of the main character to try and evade this thing and survive the night. Okay. So I think for me, that was the biggest difference between what I've been reading and what, this thing. The stakes were high. Like if this guy doesn't stop this thing, it's going to kill him.
What about Intensity?
Oh man, Intensity takes place over the span of 24 hours. Again, nonstop, relentless. But this time it's a game of cat and mouse between a woman who's trying to save her friend and later a small child and a serial killer who is so psychopathic. It's terrifying. Like the way Kuntz goes into this man's psyche, and again, the plot is constantly moving. There is no moment to really catch your breath. It's, boom, 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 boom. Looking back on it now, it was probably the fact that it's a character study. It's a character study of two different type of people and how their worlds clash. One who has significant amount of empathy and one who has no empathy at all.
You mentioned Chambers. I think that was Robert Chambers.
Yes, Robert Chambers.
Something in yellow. King in Yellow.
King in Yellow.
Oh, yeah.
What'd you like about that?
How fucking weird it is.
So I've heard.
Yeah, I had purchased, I want to say it was one of the Chaosium books called the Hastur Cycle. But I bought the Hastur Cycle, and it was like a bunch of authors whose work was inspired by the King in Yellow. And then it also had the original The Yellow Sign story. And that was my first taste of the King in Yellow mythos. And I remember being really intrigued by the caretaker figure who's has soggy skin, kind of looks like a coffin worm, I think the narrator calls him. And what's interesting is that I completely forgot about it for years. One day I'm watching this series on HBO called True Detective, and they reference Carcosa and the King in Yellow, and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot all about that. And I went and read the original collection, the King in Yellow. I have actually held a first edition of the King in Yellow in my hands. Oh, wow. My friend Patrick had acquired a copy, and he just donated it to the University of Pittsburgh for their horror collection.
Nice.
So
going back to King in Yellow for a second, you mentioned the word intrigue. Any other emotional reactions to King in Yellow?
I can't recall having an emotional reaction to it other than just being influenced by it. If that makes sense. I didn't have a visceral reaction. I didn't have an aha moment. It was just a story. Fascination with it.
Perfect.
Some of the other ones that you mentioned, Fight Club, The Stranger, American Psycho, did you have an emotional reaction to any of those, or was that all fascination as well?
The Stranger, I can remember being a first piece of fiction I read that I felt like had been written for me. The whole existentialist concept, this doesn't matter. It's all, everything's absurd, has really driven my life in a lot of ways. None of this matters, so let's have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
Gotta love that existential nihilism.
Yeah. I studied existentialism in college.
Oh.
That led me to Sartre and Kierkegaard. The Stranger was, again, I felt like I related to the guy for the most part. Some of it I didn't understand at the time. Why does he kill the dude on the beach? Didn't get that. He doesn't care that his mother died, really. But I didn't really understand that either. But his approach to life and everything and how he's then judged for it, really resonated with me at the time. Fight Club was one of those things that just hit at the right time for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Fight Club in itself is kind of a satire on unchecked machismo and manliness and all that fun stuff. More of just the outlook on life. What is it Tyler Durden says? We're polishing knobs on the Titanic. It's all going down, man. A lot of the things you own end up owning you, that sort of thing. Like for me, at that age, at that time, a lot of that was mind blowing. Because again, small Kentucky town. Didn't really have any culture aside from what was there and what I'd read in books and watched in movies. So Fight Club was one of those books I reread a lot when I was younger. Palahniuk was a big influence on my writing in college. Can't say he is anymore. I haven't read his stuff in years. But Fight Club was a big one for me. That was something that really resonated. It also, I think what really captured captured me with that book is that it showed me that you can write books like that,
Mm-hmm.
and
be successful.
And it was very much like a stream of consciousness type of writing. And that was probably the biggest takeaway from that I had as a writer. It was learning other ways to do this and learning terms for it at the time. I wasn't equipped for that. The unreliable narrator, the first person protagonist, the story within a story kind of telling.
There's a question here. I was going to ask for your teen section, and then I realized that we had not asked it for the childhood section. So I guess if you want to answer both, you
Sure.
can. But did you have any really scary dreams when you were a kid or as a teen?
Yeah.
Or any reoccurring dreams?
I had a couple of instances of sleep paralysis when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So the old hag that people see, I've seen her. It's terrifying.
Mm-hmm. It's almost either an old hag or a tall man in a hat, isn't it?
Yeah. I've seen the old hag. She had red eyes. It's like she was black and white, but she had red eyes.
You saw Mothman.
Wrong state.
From college into all through my 20s, I had a recurring dream about me and my granny going to church that I actually wrote about in Devil's Creek. And so that I wrote about that, exercising that demon on my shoulder, I guess, because it was a nightmare. It was a recurring nightmare that I had.
What was
the gist of it? Is we go to church and there isn't, the church is just inside has a dirt floor and there's a hole in the ground, and we go down into this underground temple where there's congregation and they all have like hoods over their heads. They're all chanting a language I can't understand. There's a man behind a curtain who's kind of leading the sermon. I'm scared in the dream. I tell Granny I want to leave. We go back upstairs to the main church, and like a full day has passed and there's something coming up out of the earth chasing us. And Granny tells me to run, and I do. And the dream always ended with me, that thing coming out of the earth and getting me, essentially.
Potentially, what's the word I'm looking for? Not analogy, metaphor for the small town.
Allegory.
Yeah.
Would make sense given the place that you grew up.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I've been to some churches that are just out in the middle of nowhere. And that was definitely that dream was pulling from that.
Were you ever actually terrified of something in real life as a teen?
Snakes.
You had that one on deck.
Yeah, I'm terrified of snakes. When I was a little kid, I was playing with some friends, and I bent over to pick up a stone, and a copperhead was there, and it reared back to strike. And my friend who had a bike, he ran it over. Sorry, PETA. But ever since then, like I was young, like maybe 6 years old, I've been terrified of snakes ever since. I'm not really afraid of them anymore. They're more of an annoyance, but wasps. When I was young, living with Granny, she sent me out to the edge of the driveway to get her mail. I stuck my hand in the mailbox, and they had built a nest in there, and I pulled my hand out and it was covered in wasps. Like they were all stinging. My hand was swollen. I'm crying, screaming. It was horrifying. And to this day, I still look inside the mailbox before I put my hand in.
Shit.
Yeah. That was
a tough lesson.
That's the behavioral characteristics that just kind of stick, for your entire life. You will never not do that again.
Yeah. Can relate. Lived in Florida for a long time, and I can't remember if it was wasps or I think it was wasps, but there were also red ants that built nests in our mailbox. And I definitely got that habit. But yeah. Let's see. Going into adult years, what have been some of these scary stories or books or movies that have really impacted you in your adult years?
There are many.
Top three, or first ones that come to mind. First one that comes to mind is
a short story by Michael Gray Bond called The Analog.
Okay.
It's was produced on the Pseudopod podcast several years ago, but it's basically this about this guy who's trying to track down this VHS tape that was made by this film student who became obsessed with a girl he saw in college, and about the weird things that happened to her on camera. And I can't really go into it more than that because that would be huge spoilers, but it's probably one of my all-time favorite short stories. It was a huge influence on me when I wrote my novella Scanlines. So that's one. Lately, at least in the last 10 years, It Follows, the film.
Okay.
Big influence. Even if the third act doesn't really pay off, everything that movie attempts to do is amazing.
Yeah. Especially the soundtrack.
Yeah, oh god, Disasterpieces scores. Chef's kiss.
Have you seen The Guest?
Guest.
With Dan Stevens, the guy from the show Legion?
I don't think I have.
It's pretty good. It's not exactly the same plot line as It Follows, but same. Disasterpiece also does that one.
Okay, cool. I'll look that out.
So without talking about any spoilers with The Analog, what was your emotional reaction to that?
Holy shit. Like
that is a good reaction.
That was my reaction, and like I immediately started it over and listened to it again just to make sure I caught what was going on, because it's got some subtle things happening and it's brilliant. And he's put out a collection called The Analog and Other Stories. I forget the full title. It's The Analog and something, but I highly recommend that. But yeah, holy shit, this story.
How can I say this? So in some of the other interviews that we've done, particularly of people who are creatives in the business, there is a sort of a difference between being a fan of something as an auteur versus being a fan of something because of, whatever personal emotional reaction there is to it. And so I'm wondering, was this holy shit because you were taken by surprise by the auteur portion of it, or by the emotional reaction you had towards something in the story?
The emotional reaction I had toward the story, I was in the process of coming out of one of the most depressive episodes of my life.
Okay.
The idea of unaliving myself had crossed my mind a couple of times. And for the folks who are listening, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to know.
I'm okay now. I wasn't okay then. All of that, I was coming out of that. I was crawling back out and try to be, to a more level playing field, I guess, in terms of my brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to that story because it deals with suicide. It has a graphic depiction of suicide. And I think I had such a visceral reaction to it because that had been on my mind.
Okay.
But the story is fantastic.
Okay.
And I took a lot of that into Scanlines when I wrote that. Scanlines is basically a treatise on depression and suicide.
Okay. What about It Follows?
It Follows was more from a reaction from an auteur perspective. I'm like, why the hell didn't I think of this? This is brilliant.
Don't you love when that happens?
I think we already talked about the dreams. Has there been anything that's actually terrified you in real life as an adult?
Man.
Hard to pick.
Yeah, actually. I'm a freelancer and income instability terrifies me.
Yeah.
I have no 401k. That terrifies me. The general state of the world fucking terrifies me. The state of society terrifies me. I'm terrified of something happening to my loved ones when I'm not there. Terrified of something happening to me and things being left unfinished. Perfect example, my wife and I were at AuthorCon last year down in Williamsburg, Virginia, and we got a call from her parents that our son had been in a car accident. He's fine. He was fine. Car wasn't fine, but he was fine, and that's what matters.
Right.
Yeah.
But for like the span of an hour, I was a nervous wreck.
Understandable.
And I feel like all of that terrifies me, but at the same time, I still have to get up and do some work for clients. I have to, work on my own stuff. I have to be present for my spouse. And, you kind of build up this bubble of your own world, and you kind of have to shield yourself from all these external things that are very real threats to all of us.
Focus on what you can control.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Flipping that question around, has there been a time in your adulthood when you've been completely calm or safe or bliss?
Several times.
Good.
Too many to count, actually. I worked in corporate for about 13 years. And once I finally got out of that, by virtue of getting let go during the pandemic, initially I was terrified because, okay, I got to find a job, got to send out resumes, got to do all this shit. Rather than pursuing this thing that I've been doing on the side, which is, designing book covers and interior layout and everything for publishers and other authors. Once I realized, hey, I could actually focus on this full time, and I've got enough of a client base that I could probably make a living out of this. Once I realized that and stopped worrying about my bank account and credit cards and bills, and just started focusing on doing the work, knock on wood, the bills are still paid, my mortgage is still current, I'm not being poisoned by a toxic cloud for 9 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
Am I poorer for it? Absolutely. Financially poorer, totally.
Mentally,
but
not
I'm
so much.
Mentally, I'm in the best shape I've ever been.
Good.
That's the trade-off usually.
That is the trade-off.
Get more money for less peace of mind, or vice versa.
Yeah, I didn't really realize how much of myself I had lost working in an office every day.
Mm-hmm.
I recognize not everybody can just quit and do what they want to do for a living. I respect that.
Yeah.
But stress is still there, but it's like the severity of that stress isn't compounded by all these daily stresses that you deal with on a regular basis.
Right.
It's different knowing that you don't have somebody micromanaging you. You're not picking up on some unspoken rule or etiquette that you're supposed to follow, even though nobody wants to tell you what it is.
You're getting called into the meeting in the HR office for some stupid joke that you shared via email. Yeah,
Or, being called into the manager's office because I had an expression on my face that wasn't to his liking. Yeah.
Thank you for that reminder. That's that makes me appreciate working from home even more.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot about that one. Yeah, so why are you looking upset today? Because I'm upset.
The conversation went something like, you have this way of looking at someone like you want them to die. And
I mean, I kind of do, but is there anything else you need?
He kind of chuckled and said, in fact, you're doing it right now. Yep. And I couldn't help but laugh at that because that's,
because it's funny.
Because it's funny, but it goes to show you how subconsciously you're doing these things. You have no awareness of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, stuff like that. I don't have to worry about that shit anymore because frankly, that is bullshit.
Yeah.
Just as long as your wife doesn't sit you down.
No, she does the same thing.
Todd, can we talk? Sit down at the kitchen table. Okay, so these two questions again coming in a pair, starting with the less pleasant one, so we can end on the positive one.
Sure.
Do you remember the last person you hurt?
I'm not going to name names, of course, but there are times in your career as a writer that you have to stand up for yourself and say what needs to be said, and you have to warn others from being taken advantage of. So I had to do the hard thing. I feel like more writers need to do this so that it, one, creates a environment where fly-by-night publishers and passion publishers who don't have one iota of business experience think that it's okay to just not pay the authors on time, not send a statement on time, not do all of this stuff on time.
I would, if I can cut you off real quick, I where I'm going with that is educational, because the very first thought I had was, you were like, writers need to do this more often. My first thought was, if they even know to.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's good that maybe you're doing this because you know to, and then that educates other authors to know better so that they can then do so.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. A lot of this kind of knowledge gets passed around behind the scenes at cons and whatnot, because writers love to talk about their experiences.
And rightly so.
Yeah, and like call up Brian Keene and ask him, "Hey, what's your experience with so and so?" And he'll give me an honest answer. But it's not just, I don't take my advice from just one
person. Yeah,
I ask around, and if everybody's saying the same thing, then that's a publisher I'm not going to work with. And in this particular case, the publisher was a friend. Other authors had warned me away from working with them, and I thought, no, I'm going to still do this because we're friends. They're not going to treat me like that. And that's exactly what happened. So, this publisher was using the same excuse for everything, and had been for years, come to find out. And to other authors, an excuse not to pay on time or not to pay at all, screwing basic things up, release dates, and not promoting anything at all, not even sharing something on social media, which takes 2 seconds. Folks who know me, who listen to this, are going to know exactly who I'm talking about. But I know in hindsight what I did and said hurt this person. And I feel bad about that, but there was no other course of action to take.
I mean, if they're hurting other people, then that's
exactly
on them. So
exactly.
I'm thinking that you may have answered both questions at the same time, because the follow-up then would be, do you remember the last person you helped? This is kind of, the same conversation of what you're saying, helping other people.
It's related.
The last person I helped, I mean, apart from, that whole scenario, remember that fucking guy, Robert Atone?
Yeah.
That fucking guy.
That fucking guy. No, Rob's a good friend. He, we talk almost every day, and he's relatively new in the scene.
Not doing too bad for himself.
No, he's doing great. I'm very proud of him. Don't tell him I said that, though.
He'll never hear this.
But, he'll come to me sometimes with etiquette questions like, hey, I want to follow up with this publisher that they've had my story in consideration for so long, or I need to follow up with this person and pull my story for X, Y, and Z reasons. What's a good way to do this? And, I'll try to coach him on ways to come across professionally and not, be emotionally fueled. Stuff like that. And he's done that, for me, vice versa.
Sanity check.
Yeah.
That's good. So the next two questions I'm going to ask are not just related to horror. They could cover any genre, and it's not just any one particular phase of life. Could be your entire life. But what movie would you say you've watched more times than any other?
I think I answered that already.
Is it Evil Dead 2 or
Maximum Overdrive? I thought it might be that. I had already written that down.
Actually, I'm going to say neither.
Okay.
Oh.
So there's a Disney film that my granny and I would watch all the time. And it's not as well known as a lot of the classics, but Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Okay.
It's got Angela Lansbury.
Yes.
Huh.
In the 60s.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen it, but I remember having the soundtrack album because I was raised by my grandmother, and she had all of my father's and both of my aunt's records from when they were kids.
Nice.
So I was listening to a lot of LPs and 45s from everything from the 50s through the 70s.
Yeah. Substitutionary locomotion, my dudes. All I'm saying.
Yes. The lyrics in the Disney songbook catalog back then were quite interesting. And again, going over all of your life and any particular genre, favorite movie?
Oh God, favorite movie? That's cruel. Why would you ask me? Oh, wow.
We're a horror podcast. We're cruel.
I can't limit that to just one overall. like maybe per genre I could, but I have to think about it. Off the top of my head, I'm going to go with Brazil by Terry Gilliam.
Nice choice.
Why
Thank
Brazil?
Because it's awesome.
I want his answer, not yours.
Why Brazil? Because it tries a bunch of different things. It's like a comedic take on 1984, but focuses
Yeah, it kind of is.
on like the ridiculousness of bureaucracy and the clash between feeling like you're meant to do something more meaningful, but being stuck in the cog of, you're a cog in a bigger machine, and that's all you're really destined to do.
And then something happens, like a cataclysm, like a meteor or aliens, and then all of a sudden you're rescued from your mundane life. See, this is what I was saying earlier.
Or in this particular case, a fly gets caught in a teletype machine and causes a misprint, and it sends you to the wrong person's door, and that kicks off this whole chain of events.
And then before you know it, Robert De Niro's busting through your ceiling.
Yeah, and he's telling you to stall the guys at your door and ask them if they have a 27B stroke 6.
That was my favorite part of Brazil.
Oh, yeah.
The ridiculous paperwork.
Yeah, the paperwork.
What did you like about Bed Knobs and Broomsticks? Or is it just because your grandmother liked it?
Again, this is something I've come to reflect on and realize. I think I liked it mostly because it was about a woman practicing to become a witch in order to fight the Nazis. That's pretty much that's the basis for the story. Like, she is doing this correspondence course and to become a witch and learn spells so that she can help British Army fight against Nazis, because this was during the time of the Blitz and London's being bombed every day. And I always thought that was really cool. Like, when I was a child, I didn't understand the significance of who the Nazis were and everything. But the hero is a woman. The hero is someone who falls outside of societal norms. She's, the outcast or the underdog. She's the eccentric. And it's just an adventure, and it was something that just in my memory was something that Granny and I bonded over, and because we watched it so much, and she would sing the songs. And this is no surprise to anybody listening to this or people who have followed my writing career, but Granny was a major influence in my life, and still is in a lot of ways. So that probably the biggest reason why I liked it so much.
Okay. Do you see any common threads about what kinds of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical, cosmic?
I appreciate horror that is more subtle. I appreciate horror that tries to do things that hasn't been done before or offers an interesting twist on something. Most recently, Talk to Me. I really love Talk to Me. I thought that was another one of those where I wish I'd thought of it.
You could have thought of that. A fucking mummified medium hand. I would not have thought of that in a million years.
And becoming addicted to it.
Yeah, treating it like a drug.
Yeah, like that. My God, it's brilliant. I'm more drawn to stuff like that than I am the extreme, like Terrifier with Art the Clown. I have no interest in seeing that. The things that try to innovate are more appealing to me. Gore for gore's sake doesn't do anything for me. In fact, I'm going to turn it off because I find it boring. I feel like that's the easiest way to get a reaction out of somebody, and I don't want something that's easy. I want something that has to earn my reaction.
So at this point, this is when we would talk about, any common themes that keep cropping up and maybe talk about that for a bit. And I'll just throw out the things that I'm identifying, and you can either tell me if you think these things are the most accurate or if there's something else that's more accurate that we're leaving out.
Sure.
But it sounds like there's sort of two, like a dual major, if you will. One being emotional, and that's connections to your mom and to your dad, and connections to people being bullied, and those kind of emotional connections. And then the other being absurdity and uncertainty of life in general. And as you kind of pointed out earlier, that Maximum Overdrive was really good because it's a combination of both of those things, really. But it seems like those two, like I say, dual majors kind of underline almost everything that we've talked about today.
Yeah. Are you available for appointments? Because not only did you sum that up very well, you also said it far more eloquently than I ever could.
We can get that put on a plaque for you.
I mean, I think you nailed it in a lot of aspects. Like, I'm always going to root for the underdog. Bullies will always get their comeuppance.
Mhm.
And the world doesn't care. The universe doesn't care. It's what you do.
How about the universe doesn't care, but I do?
Yeah, exactly. It's, I approach all of my creative ventures with, how can I connect with the reader emotionally? How can I get them emotionally invested? How can I toy with that investment? How can I also write about the things that interest me or say something that I want to say? I think that the best explanation is actually something that John Langan wrote in the foreword for my new collection. I don't mean that to sound like a plug. It isn't. I'm
just happened naturally. It's okay. It's okay.
He titled it "The Absurdity of Todd Kiesling," and he really focused on on a lot on my influences, stuff that we've been talking about, and kind of he examined my body of work like a teacher, and John is a teacher. And it was a really interesting analysis. It was kind of weird to read about myself like that. Mm-hmm. But, I think you really nailed it there with your summation. I tend to write about the people who are disenfranchised, their struggles with their own emotional issues, their place in the world. The Monochrome trilogy, my older series, deals heavily with that. And it also presents a world and a universe that isn't fazed by anything you do. It's not that an uncaring universe negates everything that you do. In fact, I think it gives what we do more meaning, because we are creating our own meaning within that emptiness. And that's kind of how I've approached my life a little bit. Is, I'm going to do the best that I can. Try to live the best life that I can. Love who I love, avoid the people that bring me down, avoid the people that have hurt me or what have you, and just try to create my own little universe, a microcosm of sorts.
I like what you said just there about, so these two things, creating one's own meaning and living one's own best life.
Yeah.
And so a follow-up question there would be, why horror? Because why couldn't you explore those things in other genres?
Going back to my childhood and everything, horror was something that was always there. And it was a comfort. Horror initially brought me closer to my mom when she wasn't there. I found friends through horror. Most of my friend group now, they're all horror creators. They're filmmakers, they're authors, they're artists. Horror has never judged me. Horror has never let me down. Horror has been there consistently for as long as I can remember. Horror doesn't look at the kid who's quiet in class, and say, you suck, you're different, go away, we don't want you. Horror is where that kid goes to thrive. Because for that time period, that kid is a hero in his own world. Horror doesn't judge that kid.
It's very accepting.
Yeah.
In that way.
Horror is for everyone, but more so it's for the people who don't fit anywhere else. Horror is for the weirdos and the outcasts, because with horror, you're not weird. You're not an outcast. You're part of the family.
When Chris said a minute ago, horror is accepting, the word I was thinking was inclusionary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though there are many bad actors in the genre who want to keep it exclusive, horror at its heart is inclusive. Nobody is safe, essentially. Nobody.
Well, is there anything that you've thought of that might be relevant or hasn't come up on the call, or did you think of something earlier and then, conversation took a left turn and you didn't get to say it?
No, I think I have been thoroughly psychoanalyzed. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. We'll bill you for your time.
No, it's okay. Put it on my tab.
Okay.
Put it on Robert's tab.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Again, I'm trying to remember what you were. Well, actually, I think you shared like 2 or 3 things that you're currently working on. You want to share that again before we close out?
Sure. So my most recent release is my second short story collection called Cold, Black, and Infinite, Stories of the Horrific and Strange. It's got a foreword by John Langan and was published by Cemetery Dance. My agent is currently shopping around my next novel, The Sundowners Dance. Publishers, if you're listening, please, someone buy it. And I'm working on the follow-up to Devil's Creek, tentatively titled Revelation Road.
Sounds good. We will put together a bio page for you, and we'll link to whatever you want to. So any of our listeners who are interested in that, they can find your socials and whatever you ask us to link to will be on your bio page on our site. So they can just come there, which
Awesome.
again is horrormakesushappy.com. Come check us out. Check out Todd's page there. Buy merch. Support us on Patreon. Do all the fun stuff. If you can't do that, tell a friend.